Decaying self-portrait. The eye is drawn first to the anguished visage that dominates Ivan Albright's self-portrait. A face rendered with unflinching, almost forensic precision. Every contour, every wrinkle and blemish is captured with a level of detail that borders on the obsessive. The skin, no longer a smooth mask of identity, becomes a topography of sorrow and decay, pitted, sagging, and mottled, each pore and fissure suggesting both the passage of time and the corrosion of grief. The eyes, a piercing blue, stand out in stark opposition to the putrefying flesh, wide with an intensity that suggests not only physical pain, but also profound psychological rupture. Albright refuses all pretense of beauty or idealization. Instead, he forces us to confront the inescapable reality of mortality, exposing grief as a force that eats away at both body and spirit. This is not simply a portrait of aging, but a testimony to the body's transformation under the corrosive weight of sorrow. A landscape where every anatomical detail is a marker of loss and existential collapse. The mirror's cracked reflection. Adjacent to the sitter, a cracked mirror fractures the subject's image into unsettling shards. The mirror's jagged network of fissures is more than a compositional device. It is a visual metaphor for a psyche splintered by grief. Through these cracks, the reflection appears darker, more ephemeral, and almost spectral, a ghostly echo of the already decaying face. Here, Albright conjures the sensation of a self-divided, perception refracted through the prism of sorrow. The act of reflection, traditionally a symbol of self-knowledge or vanity in portraiture, becomes instead a portrait of disintegration. The subject is no longer whole, but broken, his identity dissolved into fragments between memory and reality. The interplay between the harsh, unfiltered clarity of the painted face and the shadowed, haunted mirror image deepens the sense of internal rupture, inviting viewers to contemplate the ways grief can shatter the very foundations of selfhood. The pallor of mortality. Albright's palette leans heavily on earthy, subdued tones, muddy ochres, jaundiced yellows, and bruised purples, each carefully modulated to underscore the sickly pallor of the sitter's skin. The complexion is not simply pale, but actively mottled, punctuated by bruises, discolorations, and the subtle bloom of necrosis. This chromatic strategy transforms the face into a living map of bodily decline, a visual record of how grief inscribes itself upon the flesh. Each subtle color shift, each patch of fading vitality signals the slow erosion of life force, compelling the viewer to witness not just emotional anguish, but the biological consequences of sorrow. Every bruise and blemish is a story of loss, every patch of pallor a reminder of mortality's certainty. The painting's unwavering realism insists that the body is not immune to psychological suffering. Rather, grief is enacted in the very tissues, an existential malaise that stains the flesh as surely as it scars the soul. Hands gripping desperation. The sitter's hands, gnarled, veined, and contorted, are rendered with the same disquieting fidelity as the face. Clutching the robe with desperate force, the knuckles blanch, and tendons strain as if gripping not just fabric, but the remnants of dignity and self-control. The fingers, swollen and misshapen, reveal vulnerability and the physical toll of both age and emotional distress. Albright's meticulous focus on these hands transforms them into instruments of narrative expression. They are at once tools of defense and signals of helplessness. Through their tight grasp, we sense the struggle to maintain composure amid overwhelming sorrow, the futile act of holding together what is being inexorably torn apart. These hands, so nakedly exposed, underscore the bodily reality of grief, suggesting that suffering is as much a physical event as a psychic one. The artist's brushwork lingers over every vein and callus, making the pain palpable, tactile, and deeply human. Forehead lesions as emotional scars. The raised lesions that mar the forehead are among the most jarring elements in the composition. Their inflamed, irregular surfaces break the illusion of smoothness, acting as externalized markers of inner suffering. Albright's choice to highlight these grotesque details defies the conventions of portraiture, which so often seek to flatter or idealize. Here, each lesion is a scar of sorrow, a visible index of psychic trauma. These are wounds inflicted not by accident or disease alone, but by the corrosive action of grief itself, a process by which internal pain erupts through the skin, making the invisible visible. The meticulous rendering of texture, from the glistening redness to the dry, cracking edges, draws attention to the way emotional wounds can manifest as physical blemishes. Through this, Albright articulates the inextricable link between mind and body, showing how the burden of grief is inscribed not only in memory, but in the very substance of flesh. Dominating the composition are the eyes. Unsettlingly vivid, their blue irises shining with a clarity that seems almost supernatural amid the surrounding decay. These eyes, moist and luminous, provide a crucial counterpoint to the ravaged flesh. They are windows not just to the soul, but to the persistence of consciousness and feeling. In their gaze, there is torment, but also an urgent appeal, a demand for recognition, for understanding, perhaps for mercy. Albright invests these eyes with a psychological intensity that borders on the unbearable. They force the viewer into a position of empathy, bridging the gap between observer and subject. The paradox is striking. The mind remains acute and aware, imprisoned in a body that is crumbling under the weight of sorrow. In this gaze, we see the human spirit's refusal to be extinguished by suffering, even as it acknowledges the pain that defines its existence. The cloak of isolation draped over the figure is a heavy, dark robe, its folds rendered with the same obsessive care as the flesh beneath. The fabric forms a cocoon, enveloping the sitter and separating him from the world around him. This cloak does more than provide warmth or modesty. It becomes a symbol of isolation, a visual manifestation of the loneliness that so often accompanies deep grief. The robe's dark, somber tones reinforce the painting's atmosphere of melancholy, suggesting a shroud or a barrier, a protective layer that shields the vulnerable body while simultaneously cutting it off from contact and consolation. The contrast between the soft, enveloping fabric and the exposed, suffering flesh heightens the tension between concealment and exposure, safety and abandonment. In Albright's hands, the robe is an emblem of sorrow's isolating power, the weight that settles on the grieving, both sheltering and suffocating. Darkened space and psychological depth surrounding the figure is a background of inky darkness, a void rendered in deep, muted tones that seem to absorb light. This shadowy environment strips away any context or distraction, focusing the viewer's full attention on the figure's ordeal. The absence of tangible surroundings amplifies the sense of isolation, making the sitter appear suspended in an endless psychological night. The interplay between light and shadow is masterfully controlled, the illuminated face and hands emerging from the gloom as if lit by the last dying embers of hope. The darkness is not merely visual, it is existential, representing the void that grief can hollow out within the psyche. In this space, time seems suspended, narrative paused, a moment of stasis where suffering is both endured and displayed. Albright's manipulation of Chiaroscuro thus becomes a tool for probing the deepest recesses of human despair, inviting viewers not just to look, but to feel the depth of solitude and sorrow. Curator's reflection on meaning, craft, and legacy. Ivan Albright's decaying self-portraits are monuments to a singular vision, an uncompromising meditation on the body as a site of suffering, memory, and existential reckoning. Through his obsessive technique, every inch of canvas is transformed into a living document of grief's corrosive power. The grotesque precision with which he paints each rupture, lesion, and blemish refuses comfort or denial, instead insisting that we recognize sorrow as a force that is biological as much as it is psychological. His work stands as a radical challenge to the conventions of portraiture, rejecting idealization in favor of unvarnished truth. In stripping back the layers of flesh, Albright exposes not only the anatomy of aging, but the anatomy of grief itself. its capacity to fragment, to erode, to isolate. And yet, amid the decay, the enduring gaze affirms the persistence of consciousness and the irreducible dignity of the human subject. Albright's legacy endures in the emotional intensity and technical mastery that compel us to confront the often hidden suffering beneath the surface, reminding us that the human condition is always inevitably written upon the body.